The Kansas wind howled across the barren expanse like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of dust and dying dreams. Sam Hartwell pressed the rusted shovel deeper into the unforgiving earth, each strike echoing through the vast emptiness that had become his world. Sweat beaded on his weathered forehead despite the October chill, mixing salt with the tears he refused to acknowledge. 57 years on this earth. And for what? The question had haunted him through sleepless nights in his one-room cabin, through the endless days of tending to cattle that seemed to die faster than they multiplied, through the suffocating silence that had settled over his land like a funeral shroud. The hole was nearly 4 feet deep now, not quite regulation, but it would do. Sam had dug enough graves in his lifetime to know what was required. 3 for his children, lost to the fever that swept through Dodge City in '78. 1 for his wife Martha, whose heart simply gave out from grief 2 winters later, and countless others for neighbors, strangers, drifters who'd met their end in this unforgiving corner of Kansas. He paused, leaning heavily on the shovel handle, and gazed toward the distant lights of Dodge City. Even from 5 miles out, he could see the faint glow of the saloons and gambling halls that never seemed to sleep. Once that had been his escape, the whiskey that burned away memories, the poker games that lasted until dawn, the fights that left him bloody but feeling something, anything, other than the crushing weight of emptiness. But even those vices had lost their appeal. The bottle no longer numbed the pain, only made it sharper. The cards seemed to mock him with their patterns of chance and loss. And the fights? Hell, most men in town were either too young to remember his reputation or too old to care about testing it. Should have done this years ago, Sam muttered, his voice rough from disuse. The words were swallowed by the wind before they could reach even his own ears fully. His cabin sat 30 yards away, a squat wooden structure he'd built with his own hands back when hope still lived in his chest. The single window glowed yellow from the oil lamp he'd left burning, a lighthouse for no one, in an ocean of prairie grass and regret. Everything he owned fit in that one room. A bed that felt too big, a table scarred with years of lonely meals, shelves holding books whose words had long since lost their meaning, and Martha's rocking chair that he could never bring himself to move. The ranch itself sprawled across 200 acres of some of the most stubborn land God ever created. 15 head of cattle remained from the once proud herd of 50. The rest had succumbed to drought, disease, or his own neglect. The windmill creaked in protest against the relentless breeze, its blades spinning stories of better days when children's laughter filled the air and Martha's voice called him in for supper. Sam's hands, gnarled and scarred from decades of ranch work, tightened around the shovel. These same hands had once held his newborn son, had wiped away his daughter's tears, had traced the curve of Martha's face in the lamplight. Now they served only to dig his final resting place. The irony wasn't lost on him. Samuel Hartwell, who'd survived the Civil War, outlasted the railroad boom, weathered every storm Kansas could throw at a man, was finally surrendering to the one enemy he couldn't fight: loneliness. It crept into a man's bones like winter cold, settling deeper with each passing day, until even the sun couldn't warm the chill. He'd written the letter 3 days ago, though letter was generous for the handful of sentences he'd managed. It sat on his kitchen table, weighed down by Martha's wedding ring, addressed to the sheriff in Dodge City. Simple instructions: sell the land, give the money to the church, bury what was left of Samuel Hartwell next to his family in the town cemetery. Clean. Final. Forgotten. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of a train whistle, the evening freight heading east with cattle and dreams. Sam had heard that whistle every night for 15 years, but tonight it sounded different. Tonight it sounded like a farewell. He resumed digging, methodical and determined. The hole needed to be 6 feet deep. It was a matter of respect, even if only he would know. 6 feet separated the living from the dead, separated hope from surrender, separated the man he'd been from the man he'd become. The stars began to appear overhead, pinpricks of light in an endless canvas of black. Martha used to say each star was a prayer someone had whispered into the night sky. If that were true, Sam figured, then half the heavens belonged to him. Prayers for his children's health, for rain during drought, for strength to carry on. Unanswered prayers that had turned cold and distant as those celestial lights. As the hole deepened, so did the shadows around him. The oil lamp in his cabin flickered, casting dancing shapes across the prairie grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. a sound Sam had grown to appreciate for its honesty. At least coyotes didn't pretend their hunger was anything other than what it was. His back ached, his shoulders burned, but he pressed on. This was the last task Samuel Hartwell would ever complete, and he'd be damned if he'd do it halfway. The shovel bit into harder earth now, clay mixed with stone that fought back with every strike. Good. He wanted it to hurt. He wanted to feel something other than the numbness that had settled over him like a second skin. The wind picked up again, whistling through the gaps in his cabin walls, rattling the door that never quite closed properly. In that sound, Sam could almost hear voices. Martha calling his name, little Annie asking for one more story, young Thomas begging to help with the morning chores. Ghosts of sound in a ghost town of a life. But they were just echoes now, memories that grew fainter with each passing season, until he sometimes wondered if he'd imagined it all. Had he really once been a husband, a father, a man with purpose? Or had that been someone else's life that he'd somehow stumbled into and lost? The hole was nearly deep enough now. Sam climbed out, his joints protesting every movement, and looked down at his handiwork. Tomorrow, when the sun rose on a world that wouldn't miss him, he'd make his final decision. Tonight, he'd sit in Martha's chair one last time, maybe read a few verses from the Bible that had once brought comfort, and listen to the wind tell stories of all the things that used to matter. He gathered his tools, shouldered the shovel, and turned toward the cabin. Behind him, the dark mouth of the grave waited patiently, as graves always did. Sam had just settled into Martha's rocking chair when the first knock came. So soft, he almost dismissed it as the wind rattling the loose board near the door. He'd poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, the good stuff he'd been saving for this final night, and opened his worn Bible to Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season, he'd begun to read aloud, his voice cracking slightly, and a time to every purpose under heaven. The second knock was more insistent, definitely human. Sam froze, the whiskey glass halfway to his lips. Nobody came out to his place anymore. The last visitor had been Doc Morrison, checking on him after old Pete Garrison mentioned seeing Sam in town looking poorly. That was 3 months ago. Probably just some drifter looking for a place to sleep, Sam muttered, though his heart had begun beating faster than it had in months. He set down the glass and Bible, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt. 45 on his hip, a habit that died hard in a man who'd spent too many years in dangerous territory. The third knock came with a voice, thin and desperate. "Please, is anyone there? I need help." It was a child, a girl by the sound of it, though her voice was hoarse with exhaustion and something else. Fear, maybe, or hunger. Sam's throat constricted. He'd heard that same tone in Annie's voice the night the fever took hold, when she'd called for water that wouldn't stay down. Against every instinct screaming at him to ignore it, to let whoever it was move on, Sam stood and walked to the door. His hand hesitated on the wooden latch. Opening that door meant complications. It meant responsibility for someone other than himself. It meant delaying what he'd already decided. But the voice came again, weaker now. "Please, I'm so cold." Sam yanked the door open. Standing in the pale spill of lamplight was the most pitiful creature he'd seen since the war. A girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, though malnutrition made it hard to tell. Her dress was little more than rags, patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible. Dirt caked her face and hands, and her dark hair hung in matted tangles around sharp cheekbones, but it was her eyes that hit Sam like a punch to the gut, large, dark, and filled with the kind of desperate hope that only children could carry, even in their darkest moments. "Dear God," Sam breathed. The girl swayed on her feet, clutching a bundle of what looked like more rags to her chest. "I saw your light," she whispered. "I've been walking for days. My mama said, she said to find help if something happened to her. Where's your mama now, child?" Tears cut clean tracks through the dirt on her face. She's gone. The wagon broke down about 10 miles south. She got sick with the fever and I couldn't wake her up." Her voice broke completely on the last words. Sam felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart to keep out exactly this kind of pain. He'd seen too many children orphaned by this harsh land, had held too many small hands as they slipped away. He wouldn't take on another lost soul. But as he looked at her standing there, shivering in the October wind, he saw Annie, saw Thomas, saw every child he'd failed to save. "How long since you've eaten?" he heard himself ask. 3 days, I think, maybe 4. There was some hardtack in the wagon, but it got moldy. She hugged her bundle tighter. I saved some for my baby brother, but... Baby brother? Sam's voice sharpened. Where is he? With trembling hands, the girl peeled back a corner of the bundle to reveal a sleeping infant, maybe 6 months old. The baby's face was gaunt, his breathing shallow but steady. Alive, but barely. Something fundamental shifted in Sam's world. One desperate child was tragedy. 2 children, one of them a baby, was responsibility he couldn't walk away from, no matter how much his broken heart protested. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Both of you. The girl stumbled across the threshold, and Sam caught her elbow to steady her. She was nothing but skin and bones under the tattered dress. What's your name? Lucy, she whispered. Lucy May Turner. This is my brother, Jacob. She looked around the cabin with wide eyes, taking in the simple furniture, the warm lamplight, the smell of coffee that still lingered from this morning. Are you really going to help us? Sam closed the door against the wind and leaned against it, suddenly feeling every one of his 57 years. I reckon I am. He moved to the stove, stirring the coals back to life. When's the last time that baby nursed? Lucy's face crumpled. Yesterday morning. Mama was too sick to... And I don't know how to... She looked helpless. This child trying to mother an infant in a world that showed no mercy to the weak. We'll figure it out, Sam said, though he had no idea how. First things first. We need to get some food in both of you. He had beans left from yesterday's supper, some bacon that wasn't too far gone, and half a loaf of bread that Martha's friend Mrs. Henderson had brought by last week. It wasn't much, but it would do. As he began heating the beans, he kept glancing at Lucy, who had settled into the chair by the stove, holding little Jacob close to her chest. Where were you headed? Sam asked, keeping his voice gentle. Before the wagon broke down? California, Lucy replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Papa died last spring in Missouri. Mama heard there was work in the fruit orchards, that we could make a new start. She stroked the baby's fine hair with one dirty finger. She sold everything we had for that wagon and the oxen, said it was our chance for a better life. Sam's jaw tightened. He'd heard similar stories countless times, families betting everything on the promise of something better, only to find that the trail west was littered with broken dreams and shallow graves. The Turner family had joined that tragic procession, another casualty of hope and bad luck. The oxen? Gone. Wandered off after Mama. Lucy couldn't finish the sentence. Sam nodded, ladling the warm beans into his only clean bowl. Here, eat slow or you'll make yourself sick. Lucy accepted the bowl with shaking hands, and for a moment Sam thought she might cry again. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." As she ate, small, careful spoonfuls despite her obvious hunger, Sam found himself studying her face. There was strength there beneath the exhaustion and grief. This wasn't a child who gave up easily. She'd walked 10 miles carrying an infant, had kept them both alive when everything fell apart. That took character. The baby stirred in her arms, making soft, mewing sounds that meant hunger. Lucy looked up at Sam with panic in her eyes. I don't know what to do. I tried giving him water, but he just spits it up. Sam rubbed his jaw, thinking. He'd helped Martha with their own babies, but that seemed like a lifetime ago. Got any money? Lucy shook her head. Mama had $3 sewn into her dress, but I couldn't... She shuddered. Don't worry about that now. Sam was already reaching for his coat. There's a woman in town, Mrs. Patterson, just had a baby of her own. Might be she could nurse yours for a spell, at least until we figure something else out. You'd do that? Take us to town? Sam paused with one arm in his coat sleeve. The grave he'd dug was still waiting outside, dark and patient. His letter was still on the table. His plan had been so simple, so final, but looking at Lucy and little Jacob, he couldn't see any choice but to postpone his own ending. Get some rest, he said instead of answering directly. We'll head into Dodge City first thing in the morning. Lucy's relief was palpable. She finished the beans and curled up in Martha's chair, Jacob sleeping against her chest. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, and both children slept the deep, trusting sleep of those who'd found safety after terror. Sam stood in the doorway looking out at the grave he'd dug. Tomorrow was supposed to be his last sunrise. Instead, it would be the first day of... what? He didn't know. But for the first time in years, tomorrow held questions instead of certainty. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of pewter and pale gold. Sam had been awake for hours, sitting at his kitchen table with cold coffee, watching Lucy and Jacob sleep in Martha's chair. The baby had fussed twice during the night, and Lucy had awakened instantly each time, soothing him with whispered words. It reminded Sam painfully of Martha with their own children. The letter to the sheriff still lay under Martha's wedding ring, but somehow it seemed smaller now, less significant. The grave outside remained unfilled, a dark reminder of what almost was. Sam found himself avoiding looking in that direction. "Lucy," he said softly, as the first real light crept through the window. "Time to go." She stirred immediately, alert in the way children learned to be when danger was always close. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. We need to get Jacob to Mrs. Patterson before he gets too hungry." Sam had hitched up his old buckboard in the pre-dawn darkness, loading it with blankets. The 5-mile ride to Dodge City would take about an hour with his aging mare, Bessie. Lucy stood carefully, supporting Jacob's weight. The baby's face had taken on a grayish pallor that made Sam's chest tight with worry. They were running out of time. "I've got some clean clothes that might fit you," Sam said, gesturing toward a trunk in the corner. They belonged to my daughter." Lucy's eyes widened. "You have a daughter?" "Had," Sam corrected quietly. "She passed some years back, but I think she'd want her clothes to help another little girl." 20 minutes later, they were rolling across the prairie in the buckboard, Bessie's hooves crunching rhythmically on the frost-covered grass. Lucy sat beside Sam on the driver's bench, looking almost like a different child in Annie's clean blue dress and wool coat. She'd scrubbed her face and hands, revealing skin pale from poor nutrition. "Tell me about Dodge City," Lucy said, her voice careful. "Is it very big?" Sam almost smiled. "Bigger than what you're used to, I'd guess. Got about 3,000 people when the cattle drives are in season. Right now, in October, it's maybe half that." He glanced at her sideways. "You ever been in a real town before?" Lucy shook her head. "We lived on a farm outside Springfield. The biggest place I ever saw was the general store there, and that just had 2 rooms. Well, Dodge City's got more than that. Main Street runs east to west with the railroad tracks cutting right through the middle. North side's where the respectable folks live and work. The shops, the church, the school. South side's where the saloons and gambling halls are." "Is it dangerous?" Sam considered this. "Can be, depending on where you go and when. But most folks are just trying to make an honest living, same as anywhere else. You stick close to me and you'll be fine." As they crested a low hill, Dodge City spread out before them in the morning light. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even at this early hour, Sam could see people moving along the wooden sidewalks. The railroad depot squatted beside the tracks like a great wooden beast. Lucy leaned forward, studying the town with wide eyes. "There are so many buildings. See that white steeple there?" Sam pointed toward the north side of town. "That's the Methodist church. Mrs. Patterson lives in the house right behind it, the one with the green shutters." They rattled down Main Street, Bessie's shoes ringing against the hard-packed dirt. Early morning workers tipped their hats to Sam, and more than a few curious glances fell on Lucy and the bundle in her arms. Sam nodded back, but didn't stop to chat. The Patterson house was a neat 2-story structure with a white picket fence and a garden that showed careful attention. Sam helped Lucy down from the buckboard, noting how she winced as her feet touched the ground. Her boots were worn through at the soles, held together with string and determination. "Remember," Sam said quietly as they approached the front door, "Mrs. Patterson's got her own baby to tend. We're asking a favor, not demanding charity." Lucy nodded solemnly, adjusting Jacob in her arms. Sam knocked, and within moments the door opened to reveal a plump woman in her 30s, with flour-dusted hands and kind eyes. Sarah Patterson had been one of Martha's closest friends, and Sam had helped her husband build this very house 5 years ago. "Sam Hartwell," she said, surprise and concern mingling in her voice. "I haven't seen you in... goodness, it must be months. What brings you to..." Her words stopped as she noticed Lucy and the baby. "Oh my." "Morning, Sarah. I've got a situation here that needs a woman's wisdom." Sam's voice was steady, but Lucy could hear the uncertainty underneath. "This is Lucy Turner, and that's her baby brother Jacob. Their folks passed on the trail, and the little one, well, he needs what only a nursing mother can provide." Sarah's expression immediately shifted to one of maternal concern. She looked at Jacob, taking in his pale complexion and shallow breathing, then at Lucy's exhausted face. "How long since he's nursed?" 2 days, Lucy whispered. Maybe more. I tried to give him water, but bring him inside, quickly. Sarah stepped back, ushering them into a warm kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. My little Rose is just 6 months old herself. I've got milk enough for 2, I think. Sarah settled Lucy in a rocking chair near the fireplace while she prepared to nurse Jacob. The baby latched on immediately, his tiny fists kneading desperately as he drank. Lucy watched with tears streaming down her face, relief, gratitude, and exhaustion all flowing out at once. "There now," Sarah murmured, gently stroking Jacob's fine hair. "You poor little thing. You're going to be just fine." Sam found himself standing awkwardly by the kitchen table, feeling useless in the face of such feminine competence. The house still carried the warmth of a functioning family. It made Sam acutely aware of how cold and empty his own cabin had become. "Sam," Sarah said quietly, "can I speak with you privately?" They stepped into the parlor, leaving Lucy dozing in the chair, while Jacob continued to nurse. Sarah's expression was serious, but not unkind. "Those children have been through hell," she said without preamble. "The girl's half-starved, and that baby. Another day or two and we might have been too late." "I know." Sam's throat felt tight. "I found them on my doorstep last night. Didn't seem right to turn them away." Sarah studied his face with the sharp perception of a woman who'd known him for 20 years. "What are your plans for them?" It was the question Sam had been avoiding since dawn. "I don't rightly know. Get them fed, get them strong. After that," he shrugged helplessly. "Sam Hartwell, I've known you since you first came to Dodge City with Martha. You're a good man who's been carrying too much grief for too long." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Those children need stability, need someone who'll care for them proper, and if I'm not mistaken, you need them just as much as they need you." Sam wanted to protest, to explain about the letter on his table and the grave in his yard, but looking back into the kitchen at Lucy's peaceful face and Jacob's tiny fist wrapped around Sarah's finger, the words wouldn't come. "I can keep Jacob here during the days," Sarah continued. "Feed him until he's strong enough for cow's milk, or until we can find another solution. But Lucy, that girl needs a home, Sam. A real home. I don't know if I'm the right man for that responsibility." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But you're the man who brought them to safety. You're the man who saw 2 lost children and chose to help instead of turning away. That counts for something." Through the window, Sam could see the sun climbing higher, burning off the morning frost. Somewhere back at his ranch, that unfilled grave waited in the shadow of his cabin. But here, in Sarah Patterson's warm kitchen, something else was growing, a fragile possibility that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for any of them to start over. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said finally. Sarah smiled, the first real smile he'd seen directed at him in longer than he could remember. "That's all any of us can do, Sam. One day at a time." 3 weeks had passed since that first knock on Sam's door, and the routine had settled into something that almost felt like living again. Every morning he and Lucy would ride into town so Jacob could nurse with Sarah Patterson. Every afternoon, they'd return to the ranch where Lucy helped with simple chores while Jacob napped in a makeshift cradle Sam had fashioned from an old apple crate. But the grave still waited. Sam stood at his kitchen window, watching Lucy hang washing on the line he'd strung between 2 fence posts. She'd filled out some in the past weeks. Her cheeks had gained color, and she moved with the quiet efficiency of a child who'd learned to make herself useful. Jacob was thriving too. His gray pallor had given way to the pink flush of health, and his cries had grown strong enough to wake Sam from the other side of the cabin. Yet every time Sam stepped outside, he saw that dark rectangle of earth, 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, waiting patiently for him to remember his original purpose. "Mr. Sam?" Lucy's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, Jacob balanced on her hip. "Mrs. Patterson says Jacob's doing so well he might be ready to try cow's milk soon. Mixed with water," she said. Sam nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Yesterday, Sheriff Mason had ridden out to check on them. Word traveled fast in a small town about the hermit rancher who'd suddenly acquired 2 children. The visit had been friendly enough, but it reminded Sam that people were watching, wondering what his intentions were. "Lucy," Sam said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think real hard before you answer." She sat down at the table, her expression suddenly wary. "Yes, sir? If you could go anywhere, live with any family, what would you choose?" Lucy was quiet for a long moment, bouncing Jacob gently when he began to fuss. Are you trying to get rid of us?" The pain in her voice cut through Sam like a blade. "No, child. I'm trying to figure out what's best for you, for both of you. We don't have anywhere else to go," Lucy said quietly. "No other family left. Mama said California was our fresh start, but—" She shrugged, a gesture too old for her young shoulders. "I like it here. I like helping with the chickens and learning to milk Bessie. I like that you read to us from your Bible at night." Sam's throat tightened. He hadn't realized she'd been paying attention to those evening readings. "But mostly," Lucy continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I like that you don't look sad all the time anymore. Not like those first few days." That evening, after Lucy and Jacob had gone to sleep, Sam walked out to the grave. The October wind had blown leaves into the bottom, and one corner had started to cave in from recent rain. It looked smaller somehow, less significant than the monument to despair he'd intended it to be. He thought about Martha, about what she'd say if she could see him now. She'd always believed that God put people in your path for a reason, that there were no accidents, only providence. Standing there in the darkness, Sam could almost hear her voice. "Those children need you, Samuel Hartwell, and Lord knows you need them." The next morning brought the first hard frost of the season. Sam woke to find ice crystals on the window, and Lucy already up trying to coax warmth from the dying embers in the stove. "Here, let me," Sam said, kneeling beside her to rebuild the fire. "Winter's coming fast. We'll need to lay in more firewood soon." "We?" Lucy asked, hope creeping into her voice. Sam looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just a burden or a responsibility, but a brave young girl who'd walked 10 miles carrying a baby to save his life, who'd adapted to ranch life with the resilience of prairie grass, bending but never breaking, who'd somehow managed to pull him back from the edge of his own grave. "We," he confirmed. "That is, if you'll have a cranky old rancher for family." Lucy's smile could have lit the entire territory. "Yes, sir. We'd like that very much." That afternoon, Sam hitched up the buckboard and drove into Dodge City alone. He had business to conduct, legal papers to file, arrangements to make. At the courthouse, he spoke with Judge Morrison about formal guardianship. At the general store, he ordered supplies for the coming winter, including fabric for new dresses for Lucy and proper shoes to replace her worn-out boots. His last stop was the church, where he found Pastor Williams sweeping the front steps. "Sam Hartwell," the pastor said, surprise evident in his voice. "I was beginning to think we'd lost you." "Maybe you did for a while," Sam admitted. "But I've got reason to come back now. 2 reasons, actually. I'd like to have them baptized if you're willing. Lucy and baby Jacob." Pastor Williams set aside his broom. "Of course. They're blessed to have found you." "Other way around," Sam said quietly. When he returned to the ranch, the sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Lucy ran out to meet him, Jacob bouncing in her arms. "I've got something to show you," Sam said, climbing down from the buckboard. He pulled out a wrapped package and handed it to Lucy. Early Christmas present. Inside was a doll with a china head and real hair, the finest one in Mrs. Henderson's shop. Lucy gasped, holding it reverently. "I haven't had a doll since—" She stopped, tears gathering in her eyes. "Since you had to grow up too fast," Sam finished gently. "Well, maybe it's time you got to be a little girl again, at least, sometimes." That evening, after supper and Bible reading, Sam waited until Lucy and Jacob were asleep. Then he took a lantern and walked out to the grave one last time. In the flickering light, it looked like what it was, a hole in the ground, nothing more. He fetched his shovel and began to fill it in. Each scoop of earth felt like a choice. Dirt fell on the leaves that had blown in, covering them over, giving them back to the ground where they could become something new. With each shovelful, Sam felt lighter, as if he were burying not himself, but the man he'd been, the one who'd given up on tomorrow. By the time he finished, the moon had risen high and clear. Sam stood over the filled-in grave, breathing hard from the work, but feeling more alive than he had in years. "Thank you," he whispered to the wind, to Martha, to whatever force had sent 2 lost children to his door at exactly the right moment. Walking back to the cabin, Sam could see the warm glow of the lamp through the window. Inside, Lucy slept peacefully with her new doll tucked beside her, and Jacob made soft baby sounds in his dreams. Tomorrow, Sam would start building a proper addition to the cabin. 2 rooms, one for Lucy and one for Jacob when he got older. There would be a larger garden to plant come spring, more chickens to tend, and eventually a schoolhouse to visit when Lucy was ready for proper learning. Tomorrow, And all the tomorrows after that, Samuel Hartwell would no longer be the lonely rancher. He would be something infinitely better. He would be family. The grave was filled, and the future lay open before them like the endless Kansas sky.